Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling what is honestly one of the most emotionally charged and, frankly, consequential debates of our entire digital age. On one hand, we've got this absolute, undeniable need to protect children from exploitation online. But on the other, we're staring down the profound systemic risks of device-level surveillance. We're seeing governments and child safety groups pushing hard to monitor digital platforms to catch predators. Meanwhile, privacy advocates are throwing up massive red flags about the permanent digital infrastructure this creates for the rest of us. So we're going to impartially examine both sides of this crucial debate. We'll look exactly at what these proposed tech tools actually do, why safety experts say we desperately need them, and what this all could mean for the fundamental future of our privacy.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. We'll start by looking at the shared goal of child protection, then unpack the actual nuts and bolts of device-level scanning. From there, we'll hit the problem of context, basically how humans see things versus algorithms, before exploring the fears around the expansion of digital control. And finally, we'll test for proportionality to see how we might actually strike a balance here.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the child protection dilemma, and finding that shared goal. Look, let's start with the common ground, right? Because there are very few subjects more emotionally powerful than protecting kids. Children should not be exploited, children should not be groomed, and they absolutely shouldn't be pressured into taking or sharing nude images. For governments and child safety advocates, the reality is that traditional ways of catching predators are literally going dark. Why? Because of encrypted messaging. And that is the powerful, widely supported imperative that's really driving this push toward device-level scanning. The goal itself is entirely reasonable, and the urgent need to adapt these encrypted environments, it's incredibly real. But as we flip to the other side of the debate, there's a really critical pivot. You see, the question isn't whether children should be protected. Everyone agrees on that. The question is how. And this is where privacy advocates raise a massive concern. Does placing software directly at the operating system level of our personal phones just to inspect private content, does that make the boundary between protection and surveillance dangerously thin? I mean, once you fundamentally alter the architecture of everyone's devices to monitor for bad behavior, are you crossing a line you can literally never uncross?
Which brings us to Section 2, unpacking device-level scanning and the technological divide.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that to grasp this debate, we really have to look objectively at the tech. There is a huge distinction between cloud scanning and on-device analysis. With cloud scanning, your images are uploaded to an external server somewhere to be checked. But with on-device analysis, the software analyzes the image locally right there in your pocket. Child safety proponents really champion this on-device method because it allows your messages to stay securely encrypted while still catching known exploitative material before you ever hit send. It's often packaged in this really comforting slogan, it collects no data. But privacy advocates push back hard on this. They point out that, well, technically speaking, both methods require actively classifying your private property.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that we have to deconstruct that comforting slogan. For your phone to block an image, it actually has to inspect it first. It must classify the image, and then it has to make a decision about whether it's acceptable or unacceptable. Inspect, classify, decide. Even if the photo never physically leaves your phone, this is, by definition, data processing. Saying nothing is collected sounds super reassuring, right? But saying your phone will systematically analyze your private images and judge them, well, that sounds completely different. Yet, both of those sentences describe the exact same system.
Moving on to Section 3, the problem of context, or, as I like to think of it, the human versus the algorithm.
This is where the friction between technology and real life becomes incredibly clear. A photograph doesn't explain itself. Just think about your own photo gallery for a second. Imagine a man who helped raise his partner's children for years. He isn't their biological dad, but he went on family holidays, took photos by the pool, kept those memories. Years later, the relationship ends, but the photos are still on his device. What a human sees there is context, a chapter of family life, innocent memories. But a machine stripped of human context sees only variables. It sees child, skin, swimwear, nudity probability, and it spits out a risk score. To the software, an innocent beach memory could become a highly suspicious signal, and once that suspicion enters a government or corporate database, innocent people can get trapped in this totally opaque system. False positives aren't just minor technical glitches, they can literally destroy families and careers.
Which leads us perfectly to this incredibly common counterargument. We hear it all the time when privacy concerns come up, right? If you have done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear. People use it as a quick way to dismiss anxieties about surveillance. But understanding exactly why privacy advocates push back so fiercely against this specific phrase, That is the key to understanding this entire debate.
Because for that quote to actually be true, you have to make some massive, frankly, historical assumptions. You have to assume the databases are perfectly accurate. You have to assume algorithms can just suddenly understand the complex nuances of human context. You have to assume human reviewers are entirely fair, that future governments will be restrained, that there will be absolutely no mission creep, and that the innocent will always be protected from error. And history gives us zero reason to be that universally trusting. Honestly, most people aren't afraid of being caught doing something wrong. They're terrified of a flawed machine wrongly interpreting them as having done something wrong. Safety advocates argue these algorithms are highly accurate and getting better every day, but privacy advocates argue the cost of even a single error is just way too high.
So, let's look at Section 4, the expansion of control and that dreaded slippery slope.
What's the long-term impact of building this kind of digital infrastructure? Well, and this brilliantly illustrates it, look at this actual example from an everyday Amazon product description to see the problem with automated moderation. A human reads "perfect for travelers" and simply thinks of people going on vacation, right? But an automated moderation system flagged the word travelers because, in a completely different context, it could refer to a protected group or be used as an insult. The algorithm isn't offended. It's just trying to avoid the mere possibility of offense. Automated censorship inevitably shifts from blocking what is actually harmful to blocking what might possibly be interpreted as harmful.
And this kind of algorithmic hypersensitivity builds into the ultimate fear for privacy advocates: mission creep. A government might genuinely introduce a scanning power purely for child protection, targeting nudity or exploitation. But governments are temporary. Capabilities are permanent. Once the architecture to scan private content exists on every single phone, the question changes from "should we build this" to "what else should it scan for?" The slope goes from nudity to extremism to misinformation to unapproved news or even political dissent. Each step is justified as absolutely necessary for safety, but each step expands digital control over the individual.
All right, finally, Section 5, testing for proportionality and finding that balance.
So, if the goal is child safety, are there ways to achieve it without scanning every citizen's device? Well, privacy advocates highlight a much less intrusive alternative: target the risk directly where it lives. While safety proponents are quick to point out this is pretty hard to enforce with older teens, the reality is that young children frankly don't need full smartphones with unrestricted cameras, encrypted messaging, and social media feeds. A basic child-friendly phone with calls, texts, and GPS, that meets the vast majority of safety needs. This approach places the restriction exactly where the risk is, on children's devices, rather than radically altering the privacy architecture of every single adult's personal device in the process. To find a balance, privacy advocates propose a strict proportionality test for literally any safety measure. We have to ask the hard questions. Does the technology target the actual risk? Is it completely transparent and independently audited? Can a human easily appeal a mistake? Does it unnecessarily monitor adults? And crucially, could this capability be expanded later by a future, maybe less scrupulous government? If a proposal cannot clearly and safely answer these questions, the argument is that the public should be extremely cautious about basically writing a blank check for permanent digital monitoring.
Ultimately, we are caught right between a profound moral duty and a massive technological risk. And behind both of those is an overarching, absolutely critical question that we all have to answer. Are we building a society where private devices remain under the control of their owners? Or are we constructing one where every single image, message, and digital interaction requires automated permission just to exist? Protecting children is absolutely necessary, for sure, but we have to carefully weigh whether that protection requires treating every citizen's pocket as a checkpoint. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.